What I'm about to share with you is not easy listening, and this story will probably shock and appall you. And before anyone accuses me of making it up, it's all thoroughly documented. We have an internationally recognized musician who finds himself in a public relationship with a much younger teenage girl. Their relationship is openly discussed in the media. Their ages raise eyebrows, but somehow the fuss dies down, and while it regularly pops up over the years on social media, it's recognized as inappropriate. Nobody seems to care. No, this video isn't actually about the person that you probably think it's about. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the problem with Bill Wyman of the Rolling Stones, and how he was never arrested and jailed is frankly a mystery. I'm Robert J. Simpson. I'm a film and cultural historian, and while I've long publicly discussed problematic people in the arts, a number of folk in response to other videos I've made have repeatedly asked me to post something about someone who's alive today, and Bill is. There are a litany of artists with a track record of grooming and predatory behaviour. Some of that behaviour gets dismissed, with varying levels of acceptability as being perhaps because of the era that their actions took place in. Some of it gets dismissed because of their status as wealthy or famous people. Some of it gets dismissed because there are people out there who have been involved in similar situations on one side or the other, and they don't want the lens pointed too closely at themselves. Over the years, I've come back to this topic a lot, and my opinions have evolved as I've gotten older. I sometimes really struggle with this notion of separating art from the artist, but I also recognize that the arts is frequently a very collaborative space, and when you freelance, you don't always have a lot of choice in terms of which projects that you do, and well, let's be honest, some people can be absolutely lovely to you and horrible to somebody else. Some of those problematic artists, believe it or not, have made art that I like. And that sometimes makes enjoying it really, really difficult. One of those artists for me is Bill Wyman. I'm a fan of the Rolling Stones music. I have been since I was a teenager, but I'm not a fan of some of their activities, and what Wyman did positively revolts me. I've actually known about the basis of this story for quite a few years, but I haven't deep dived into it before, and after doing that deep dive into the published accounts of the scandal, how the media handled it, and looking at the culture of misogyny and predatory activity that surrounds it, I'm actually shocked. And honestly, if after hearing this story, you think it's acceptable, there's something wrong with you. I like what Bill has done with promoting archaeology, metal detecting, and chronicling the band he was once a part of. But as a human being, I will always find him repulsive for taking advantage of at least one child. Now, there is a fair bit of detail in this, with most of it taken actually from the accounts of those involved. This is dealing with a serious subject, and some of the details are deeply uncomfortable. So please, if you are easily upset or offended, I suggest that you switch off now. So if you have never heard this story or don't know anything about the details, the very condensed version is this. On the 2nd of June 1989, at the age of 52, Bill Wyman, who at that point was best known as the bassist with the Rolling Stones, married a girl called Mandy Smith, who was just 1 month shy of her 19th birthday. They would divorce just under 2 years later, with Smith receiving a hefty financial settlement. So what? I hear you say. They were both consenting adults. Well, indeed. But that, I'm afraid, is not the story. Wyman and Smith had actually been in a public relationship since the summer of 1986, when she was just 16 and he was 49, and that raised eyebrows, particularly when it came out that Mandy was just 13 when they met and he was 47. I really shouldn't need to editorialize this, but it has become very clear to me from comments that I received the last time I talked about predatory behaviour that most people don't really understand what grooming is, and how the age gap relationships when one of the people in the relationship is a minor, that is under 18, are highly inappropriate, if not downright illegal. The law has changed a lot in the 40 years since Bill Wyman conducted his public affair, but attitudes among men in particular seem to be stuck. And while we shouldn't judge the past by the standards of today, it is very clear that this was a scandal in the 1980s, and one that should not have been forgotten. The age of consent in the UK in the 1980s was 16, And so while eyebrows were raised when the story first came out that they were together, the upshot for many in the aftermath of their eventual marriage was that there was nothing illegal about it at that point. It was just maybe a little bit gross. Grooming isn't well understood by most, that's very clear. There are very clear legal definitions for when grooming is a crime, and this is particularly relevant whenever we're talking about sex or financial rewards, irrespective of age, but particularly when we're talking about a child. But you may not realize this, grooming isn't actually always illegal, though it is immoral and questionable. Essentially, grooming is an issue of psychology and power. It's about trying to build up a relationship with someone built around trust. It involves manipulation of psyche and dependency and is often supplanted with reward and intimidation. When you are put in a position of trust and responsibility, the opportunity to emotionally manipulate is multiplied. Groomers will try to make someone feel special and important, but ultimately they call the shots and many victims become dependent on them. Often, the victims don't realize until years later, and some never accept what went on. They're still bonded to the groomer because they were such an important part of their life journey or their success. And just because a victim doesn't call out their groomer, it doesn't mean they weren't groomed. What is surprising about Bill Wyman's situation is that it's been an open secret since 1986 and police knew about it. His 1990 autobiography, Stone Alone, gives shocking detail about their relationship. So he tells us that he met her at the Lyceum in London on the 21st of February 1984 at the Daily Mirror British Rock Awards. Bill is something of a newspaper clipping fanaticist. He keeps lots of clippings about his career, his life. He also keeps a very meticulous diary. So he's very precise in terms of the timings of all this, which would have been incredibly useful for an investigation, I'm sure. He was with filmmaker Julian Temple when he, and I quote, "saw two stunning girls leaving the dance floor and my heart just jumped. She took my breath away. I felt like I'd been whacked over the head with a hammer. I immediately said to Julian, I've got to meet that girl, got to talk to her. Can you go and invite them over?" So he then meets Mandy and her older sister. Bill suggests to them that he thought they were twins, aged about 20, but no. Sister reveals that she's 15 and Mandy is only 13 years of age. "What?" I said. "We could just not believe it." In case you missed that, that's the ever useful "she looked much older" officer alibi in full force here. And that, yes, that is an actual line of defense that some have used when they're caught. And it is admissible in some courts. Mandy tells Bill that she wants to get into modelling, and Bill can't stop himself from offering to help this child. He says, "Give me your number and I'll give you a ring with some details." 47-year-old Bill knows exactly where his head is at. He says, "I was totally besotted with Mandy from the moment I saw her, but I was playing it cool and knowing her age, I wanted to be careful and particularly open from the start with her mother." So look, Bill is conscious that Mandy is a child and he needs to get the approval of Mandy's mum in order to advance his desire. In the meantime, they meet with a modelling agency who dismisses them as they were, and I quote, "rather young." Even the modelling agency knows what's up. But it's also worth noting that when Mandy talks about their meeting in her 1983 memoir, It's All Over Now, she claims that at the time she didn't know who he was, but that, and I quote, "there was something nice about him. He was kindly in a sort of avuncular way, not predatory like other older men. He had to be 40 if he was a day, but he didn't seem like a dirty old man. He seemed to be genuinely interested in helping us. If he had his pick of all the women around him, he was surely not going to be chasing us. Why bother? He was very, very charming, and that certainly wasn't a quality I'd become much acquainted with among the boys I'd met up until then." Of the dismissal by the modelling agency, Mandy notes that the agency staff, and I quote, "instantly recognised a child that had a fair old way to go before she reached womanhood, never mind a catwalk." End quote. Mandy's memoir details a love bomb of attention in an intense period of time. She says, "he invaded my life without giving me time to draw breath." On the 8th of March, so 2 weeks later essentially, Bill visits the Smith household armed with flowers and chocolates, and they have a jolly good time. And Mum says it's okay to take Mandy to dinner because she's been going to pubs and clubs for ages already. If your alarms haven't gone off before now, these next couple of quotes should set them. Bill tells us that after dinner, he kissed Mandy. And in words that have me wanting to phone the police right away, he says, and this is disgusting. She was a woman at 13, and she certainly looked like the 20-year-old I had originally believed her to have been. Oh, Mandy's memoir is stark. To his kiss, she says that she was stiff and unresponsive, not yielding to his kiss at all. He was holding my arms very firmly down by my sides. I didn't kiss him back. Then he said quite simply, that was something I had to do. Then they start going to clubs where Bill says, she was introduced to all my friends. Everyone accepted her as an adult without question. All the stones tried to warn me off, but there was nothing I could do. Logic told me one thing, my feelings another. Emotions always win in the end, so that was it. I was in love. So here we have a grown-ass man parading a 13-year-old girl around as his partner. He's been warned off by his colleagues who see this as a step too far, and he's insisting to everyone and her that she's a woman and it's love. Grooming and predatory behaviour thrives on manipulation and deception. The predator has to seem reasonable. The consequences of their behaviour are never their fault. Bill's book tells us that for 2.5 years they were an incredibly well-kept secret. And during that time, to divert attention, they saw other people as well. Mandy's memoir tells us that she was encouraged to lie about her age to let on that she was 17 or so and that she wasn't keen on the idea of lying. Out one evening, not long into this relationship, at Tramp, she's asked about her age. Her memoir notes, and I think this is very telling. She says, not until much later did I learn that this was always the question on everyone's lips whenever they meet a new girl of Bill's. His partiality for teenage models was well known in Tramp and among his friends, so it was automatically the first question they asked. Eventually, they row on the day of her 16th birthday. So this is 2.5 years later. He says, we decided to go our separate ways, and yet we got on too well to stop talking. She would call me for chats and advice about her singing and modelling career, and I phoned her occasionally. So Bill was throughout their time together also providing a network and sage advice for Mandy's life and career, nurturing a position as a trusted authority figure, which is itself another grooming action. Over the weekend of the 3rd of August 1986, the affair became public knowledge, with front-page headlines in the tabloids that the couple had known each other since she was 13, that they shared a bed and a home as man and wife, and that the police were now making inquiries. The Star newspaper of the 4th of August sensationally states, she says she often met him from school still wearing her uniform, and they jetted off for secret holidays together. They also describe her as a beautiful blonde who lost her virginity to the rock star, sexualizing this young girl even further. The paper quotes Mandy's grandfather as being very angry about the whole affair, but he's leaving it down to her parents to do something about it. That same edition of the newspaper, in a classic tabloid deal, has a centre-page interview with Wyman in which he brags about bedding over 1,000 women in his life. And in it he says, I just enjoy female company. I enjoy it as often as I can. And his assistant, who's sitting in on the interview, says, he's not like a dirty old man with girls. He's very honest and straight with them. He just says, do you wanna... ... which is tabloid way of printing for fuck. So in the same paper, including among this text of the same authorised interview with Bill Wyman, is the detail that Mandy and Wyman became lovers when she was 13. Yep, they are actually that brazen about it. In Stone Alone, Wyman tells us he had been in France for a couple of weeks before the story actually broke, and, I quote, my lawyer told me that there was the possibility of criminal charges and I should stay in France until things cooled down. Which he did, for 11 weeks. He continues, it was a nightmare. I didn't think I'd done her any harm, whatever her age. Quite the reverse. I was deeply upset at being in the limelight like this because I'd looked after Mandy and treated her honourably. I'd tried to encourage her to continue her education when she'd flunked out. I'd tried to help her career. I hadn't introduced her to alcohol or drugs. I simply wanted to be with her. So here again, we have Bill presenting himself as this benevolent entity, nurturing her career, and if she was involved in alcohol or drugs, he had nothing to do with it. The police call in Mandy and her mother Patsy for questioning, but the two refused to provide any statement, and they answer all questions on the advice of Bill's solicitor with no comment. So the police at the time were unable to take any further action. In an interview with the Daily Mirror on the 26th of August, Mandy's mother Patsy astonishingly says, "People should mind their own bloody business. I have always believed that children should have their freedom. As far as I'm concerned, nothing happened that need concern the police." There's also this serialized interview with Mandy that's conducted by the woman's editor, Christina Appleyard, complete with provocative pictures, which lays it out. She says, "Suddenly she was whisked off into a life that other girls of her age spend their time staring at the posters on their bedroom walls dreaming about. Living with a rock star, all the clothes that she wanted, and being on first name terms with people like Elton John and David Bowie, and all with her mother's permission." At every step of the way, I can't help but be dumbfounded by the language that's used and just how open everything about this scandal actually is. There's abundant evidence of Bill Wyman's predatory and paedophilic behaviour, and yet he's now just viewed as this sort of grandfather figure who plays blues music. There is an absolutely horrendous article in the Daily Mirror of the 6th of August 1986, just after the scandal leaked, labelled "Stone Age Stir." I'm going to share it with you because I think you need to understand how little certain parts of the media seem to care about predators, certainly back in the 1980s and still in some places today. It reads, "I hope nobody is going to waste police time, at least of all the police, investigating Rolling Stone Bill Wyman's alleged affair with a 13-year-old girl. Mandy Smith, now 16, claims she slept with the rock star for 2.5 years. She knew it was wrong, her mum knew it was wrong, and so did Bill Wyman. I do not know if it has damaged her for life. I do not know if it has damaged her at all. But I do know police involvement is going to do nothing useful. It isn't nice to think of 13-year-old girls having sex, but some do. And unless it's against their will and against the will of their parents, it seems to me highly impractical for any third party to think that they can have any influence whatsoever on the situation." What do you say in response to that? A major tabloid newspaper telling the police to back off investigating while using another photo of the girl to sell their papers. And for anyone in the back, I can't believe I have to say this, but it doesn't matter if your parents approve of you having sex with an adult when you're a young teenager. It's immoral, and in most countries, it's against the law. Oh, and the author of that piece, because I know you're going to want to know this, it's one Anne Robinson. Yes, that Anne Robinson. You are the weakest link, Anne. Goodbye. I did tell you this was a revolting story, didn't I? Bill had one more trick up his sleeve when it came to deflecting any blame or suspicion on his inappropriate relationship, and that was to cite the charity work that he did, which was now suffering because of the scandal. There's a piece that I found in the Western Daily Press of the 15th of April 1987 entitled "Wyman, Mandy and My Dream." In it, he bemoans the fact that the tabloid intrusion has made life a little bit difficult, and now he can't help as many other teenagers as he'd like. Again, I'm just going to read this to you because it's textbook emotional manipulation. So the article reads, "Bill Wyman admitted that his relationship with teenager Mandy Smith almost wrecked his dream of helping young musicians break into show business. He was in London announcing plans to give teenagers across Britain free access to a 48-track mobile recording studio. We had to put a hold on this project for 3 or 4 months because I had a lot of bad publicity last autumn." Where's my violin here? "Yesterday," he said, "I get slagged off through this one incident in my life, this young girl. That's it. I'm tainted now forever. That's all right. I don't care anymore." And you see, that's just it. The story is there. Everyone knows about it, but Bill doesn't care. There's no consequences, really. And because he's a really nice guy, Bill has put £40,000 of his own money in his youth project, which he calls AIMS, Ambition, Ideas, Motivation, Success. And kids can record in this studio as it tours the UK with local government support. As Bill continues to talk in this interview, he tries to reassure us that nobody actually cares about his inappropriate relationship with Mandy. He says, "I got loads of letters from the public, not Stones fans, not my fans. We got grandmothers writing to us saying, 'We're behind you,' and old aunts." How many of you are sitting there asking for proof of this? No, I mean, look, they actually probably did receive those sorts of letters. That's the way the world works. But I imagine that there were also letters calling him a sex pest too. But we're not going to hear about those. And then he signs off this conversation by deflecting from his and Mandy's relationship, saying, "We are great friends. We always have been. We never were anything else." which is nonsense because they've already fessed up to the affair. In Stone Alone, Bill is still annoyed at the press intrusion in his clandestine relationship. He tells us that the rest of the Stones barely spoke to him during this period, which also coincided with the troubled production of the Dirty Work album and its aftermath. He says, the papers wouldn't let go, of course. Members of Parliament who wanted their names in lights were speaking out and would not let the matter drop. The press were able to publish what they fancied with the certainty that I could not retaliate. I mean, how awful is it that the press and politicians might call out a paedophile for their actions, right? Even when Bill and Mandy decide to announce their marriage in 1989, they still can't let it drop. Bill says, one aspect of all the media madness irritated me. Despite the fact we'd given them the hottest love story in years, some writers wouldn't stop taunting us. The Daily Mail enlisted the aid of a psychologist to attempt to analyse the attraction between the ageing pop star and his child lover. With the announcement of a marriage and making everything legal, the mood in the press actually noticeably changes because it's now legit, because they are now both consenting adults. Again, in Stone Alone, Bill says, I admitted that in dating Mandy, I defied my conscience, which had been overtaken by my emotions. It was like finding religion. If it happens once or twice in your life, you're lucky. Picasso was 75 when he married a 35-year-old. That marriage lasted, and there's no reason why ours shouldn't be the same. Oh, Bill, it really wouldn't last, would it? But also, look, aside from the obvious problem of picking Picasso as a role model, an artist who's known for his misogyny and abusive treatment of women, Picasso and Jacqueline Roch, who Wyman is referring to, were both adults when they met. Mandy Smith was a child when Bill Wyman clasped his eyes on her and took advantage of her. Mandy talks at length about her relationship with Bill following their divorce in her 1993 memoir, It's All Over Now. I have deliberately not explored that in great detail here because I wanted to focus on the insight into the mind of the predator that Bill's interviews and biography offers. But Mandy's memoir is a disturbing insight into the methodology of the predator and the impression that it leaves in the victim. The whole affair is a prime example of how famous people can get away with predatory behaviour in plain sight, how the media conspires with agents and PR companies to sell papers and mask the truth, of the limitations of the police when witnesses aren't prepared to speak out. Whenever there's a whiff of a scandal about a celebrity on social media and people are trying to dismiss the claims, and they're reminded that there are laws around defamation and the power of lawyers to stifle speech, it never seems to get through that truth is often hidden as a result. Mandy's autobiography talks about how her affair with Bill Wyman had actually been known about by the newspapers for some time before it came out in print. As she says, I lived in trepidation of anyone ever finding out the truth about us, but Bill, with his battery of top-flight Stones lawyers, was well versed in the techniques of avoiding scandal. He knew that even if they did get a sniff of our liaison, the papers could do nothing about it. All they had to do was print rumour and hearsay, and Bill would have swept in with a massive claim for libel. Before they could print it, they had to prove it. Now, that hasn't changed today. Those laws are still in existence, and even when something is known about and is true, unless you have that concrete supporting evidence to prove things, it's very, very difficult to proceed. But also, and look, this is really worth reminding you that none of this is actually a secret. It's been in the public domain for 40 years, and now, at the age of 89, Bill Wyman has never been arrested for it, never been charged or seen the inside of a prison cell over it. And his victim has repeatedly told us that she first had sex with a 47-year-old rock star when she was aged just 13. She, a confirmed victim, has told us that he had a known predilection for teenagers, and yet nobody bats an eyelid. And at 13 years of age, Mandy Smith could not give consent. She was a child who was taken advantage of and repeatedly raped by Wyman. How many people in that situation witnessed what was going on and said nothing? How many people have tried speaking out and been silenced by solicitors and legal threats and payoffs? How many other victims are there? And what sort of example does this whole case give others? There are famous people out there and people in power who have abused their privilege and hid it in plain sight. And there are communities out there who are enabling and helping to cover their secrets by shutting down the victims and witnesses and excusing the crimes and the problematic behaviour. If you've been impacted at all by the content of this video, please know that you are not alone. Support organisations are available in most areas across the world. Please reach out to them. This video script has been written by an actual human being, that's me, without the use of generative AI. Generative AI is not welcome. It has drawn extensively, as this video has drawn extensively, on the published memoirs of both Bill Wyman and Mandy Smith alongside original newspaper articles. Both those memoirs are long out of print, but you can read them at archive.org. I'm Robert J.E. Simpson. Thanks for listening.